through the Gita, and this is chapter number 12 on Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. And in a sense, it's the pathway to the divine. And as we'll see, that there are many different ways in which Bhagwan presents the idea of divinity in the Bhagavad Gita. And I'll take you through each and every kind of chapter which describes the divine in such a way that we begin to understand that there are various different dimensions or levels at which we can understand the divine. So in this case then, what we are going to do first of all is to look at the themes which are there in the chapter number 12. First of all, I'm going to talk about the nature of the divine according to the Bhagavad Gita, an overview. And this is again something for you to read back, contemplate upon, to go back to the chapters which describe the one which I'm going to describe, and see the commentaries in this particular verses, which give a very kind of clear picture which Bhagwan gives Arjuna in understanding the divine. So right at the very beginning of this chapter, Arjuna is asking this very pertinent question. Because you remember, in chapter number 11, he had the vision of the cosmic form. And because Lord Krishna has been talking about the manifest and the unmanifest as two ways in which we can understand the divine. So Arjuna's question is really about who should I worship? Or who is the best versed in yoga, the worshipper of the manifest or the unmanifest divine? Which is also something which we can ourselves ask as sadhaks. Because we want to know, do I go through this process of worshipping the manifest form, or do I go into meditation to experience the unmanifest divine? And of course we know that the Bhagavad Gita has been set out in such a way that it takes you right from the very beginning of the development of yourself as a sadhak, entering the spiritual path, right up to the point where you become totally self-realized. And this pathway which we have been talking about, I'm going to again kind of refer back to that as well, to understand really these concepts of Saguna and Nirguna Brahman, which we are going to look at in some detail. So the next thing which Bhagwan, after having talked about the Saguna and Nirguna Bhakti Upasana, he starts talking about the ladder of practices. So as usual, Bhagwan is very kind of compassionate because he wants to give everybody a chance. He says, if you can't do this, then you do this. If you can't do this, then do this. If you can't do this, then do this. So he's approaching this in such a way that he wants to everybody to kind of engage with the divine. One way or the other, whatever level you are, he wants us to engage with the divine. And this wonderful kind of section in this chapter is about the 36 qualities of a perfect bhakta. And Bhagwan himself, this is the person who is dear to me. This is the bhakta who is so dear to me because he has cultivated these qualities. And another way of looking at it to see is that the person who has perfected himself in terms of purification and has established himself in this wonderful knowledge, he spontaneously begins to express these qualities in his or her life. For the sadhak, it is a matter of development and cultivating these qualities. But for somebody who has reached that level of purity, like these Mahatmas and these sadhus and saints which we see, so as I was saying, the nature of the divine according to the Bhagavad Gita, this is an overview. Then Arjuna is asking the question, who is better versed in yoga, the worshipper of the manifest or the unmanifest divine? And this, like I was saying, is a very pertinent question because for us, sometimes we wonder, should I sit down in meditation or should I do my puja? Should I do my chanting or should I begin to do dhyanam? And therefore, it is a question which then Bhagwan addresses in the way in which he talks about Saguna Nirguna Upasakas and how both of these are relevant in our spiritual pathway, but they can be applied at different stages of our journey. The ladder of practices and the best practice. This is what then Bhagwan begins to tell Arjuna about. And as I was saying, that Bhagwan is really such a compassionate way of teaching that he wants to include everybody. Whatever level you are at, he will say, okay, you can practice here, you can do this, whatever it is that you are able to do according to the stage of your development and where you have reached in terms of your purification, you can begin to take up this practice. And then the 36 qualities of a perfect bhakta is what Bhagwan then talks about. Very beautiful section, like I was saying, is this qualities which we can, as seekers and as bhaktas, begin to cultivate in our own life. And once we begin to do that, it is such a wonderful experience to have, as it begins to have an effect on our consciousness to such an extent that it becomes still and silent. At the same time, expressing these qualities in our life in relationship to other people and other things and the world around us. So it's a wonderful chapter, only 20 verses, and sometimes I tell people that, if you can memorize this chapter, then it becomes such a wonderful way of not only connecting with the knowledge and the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita, but also in the sense of focusing our life on this very important way of connecting with the divine through what Bhagwan is giving us as the best practice in terms of bhakti, and also to develop and cultivate these 36 qualities. So then, of course, we will see what you can do in terms of your own sadhana, and some suggestion about how that can be expressed in your own life. Okay, so let's start by looking at the journey so far. And we have talked about this before, that the first 6 chapters describe the jiva, the human condition, where Arjuna himself is presenting to us right at the very beginning of the Bhagavad Gita as somebody who is having this kind of very conflicted situation in which he finds himself and says, look, I am totally confused, tell me what to do. And he is suffering. He is suffering shoka, moha, bhaya. These are the 3 things he is experiencing at that moment right in the middle of the battlefield as one of the greatest warriors. And him having such a kind of crisis and breakdown in the middle of the battlefield is in an indication that, this is how we can experience our own lives in various different degrees. And Bhagwan's response is really, and the teaching of Bhagavad Gita, for those of you who are coming for the first time, really the teaching is all about what is the response to our life's journey, our existential condition, which Arjuna kind of represents for us. And what is our response to that existential condition of being human in this world? And how is it that we are suffering in this condition? So Bhagwan's response in terms of Sankhya Yoga, Karma Yoga, and an indicator as to what is this person of perfection who has established himself in this knowledge. So Bhagwan's overall teaching is given in chapter number 2. Then he focuses on Karma Yoga itself, the nature of action, sacrifice, the means of purification through Karma Yoga, and then renunciation of action in knowledge. So in terms of giving up the fruit of the action, and then renouncing the action itself, and then coming to a stage whereby true renunciation begins to express itself in our life, so that we become more and more established in jnana nishtha. And we move towards the final stage of our journey, which is getting deeply absorbed in the self. Having gone through this journey of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Jnana Nishtha, and then Brahma Nishtha, taking us to the technique of meditation, which is given very fully in chapter number 6. And then it explains to us exactly how to sit down with a mind which is totally prepared, and it goes into deep states of meditation where we can experience our true self. Wonderfully laid out in terms of step-by-step journey and how we can evolve in our spiritual development to reach the highest state of pure consciousness. This is what Bhagavad Gita is wonderfully giving us. So the second set of 6 chapters then switches over to the divine. So this is like switching the channel to the human condition, to that about divinity, Supreme Brahman, Jnana Vijnana, which starts off in chapter number 7, and right up to chapter number 12. Step by step, Bhagwan is explaining to us all the aspects of Brahman, whether it is the unmanifest, pure consciousness, pure existence, pure bliss, or whether it is the cosmic creation, which then is nothing but the expression of the divine. And then coming right down to our own individual levels, you and me. How is that divinity related to each one of us in our own lives? And how is it continuously trying to express itself in you and me? But because of this curtain of ajnana and this agitation in the mind, that we are not able to even know that there is divinity right in our own selves. So yoga of imperishable Brahman, Rajavidya, Rajaguhya, the supreme knowledge, the supreme secret which Bhagwan reveals in chapter number 9, and then going on to the vibhutis, the wonderful vibhutis which are all around us. And this is the wonderful teaching of Bhagavad Gita, is it takes you right to your level of perception and saying, look at the world around you and you will see the divine if you only know how to do that. And he gives us the means of doing that as well. And in chapter number 11, Bhagwan is giving Arjuna the all-encompassing vision of the divine through this special dispensation to Arjuna, when he gives him the divine eye, the Divya Chakshu, through which he then begins to see the enormous cosmic form of Bhagwan. And beautiful description of this cosmic form, which is given to us as well. And of course, we know Sanjay is there. He is also having that divine vision. And to the blind king, he is giving this commentary. And this commentary of Arjuna expressing himself and seeing what he is seeing and telling us what he is seeing. Another wonderful chapter which gives us a complete picture of that cosmic form of the divine. And here we now come to the yoga of devotion, which is in a sense culmination, a kind of distillation of bhakti, yoga of devotion, but primarily kind of focused on saguna bhakti. And I'll explain why Bhagwan is keen for us to understand it in that way, because this is now related to the overall kind of development of ourselves in the spiritual journey. Okay, so let's look at these two aspects. One is the nature of the divine according to the Bhagavad Gita, which is again something we can kind of maybe miss if we are not looking at the various themes and how Bhagwan kind of interweaves all these things in terms of karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, and all the things which he kind of expresses in all these different chapters, to bring them together and then to understand the nature of divine is what I'm going to explain. And then to look at Arjuna's question about the worshipper of the manifest or unmanifest divine, who is better versed in yoga. So let's look at that section now. So Arjuna's question, of course, as I was saying, he is saying, those devotees, ever steadfast, thus worship you, and also those who worship the imperishable, the unmanifest. Which of them is better versed in yoga? So which of them is better versed in yoga could mean that who is more kind of connected with the divine. It could mean who is a better practitioner of yoga. And it could mean that which is, in a sense, what Arjuna may be asking is, which path should I follow myself? And all these questions are relevant because, we want to know at what level do I start practicing a particular sadhana in order for me to take me to that level of experience and understanding, but at the same time, what is the step forward? So we want to also know that for ourselves. So what Arjuna is asking about is two objects of worship. Okay, one is the manifest, and the other one is unmanifest. Here we have to be slightly careful as the object of worship, because in the manifest there can be a subject and an object. And this dualistic relationship allows us to have the perception of the divine in the manifest form, we ourselves being the subject of that perception. Whereas in the unmanifest, actually there is no object. Ultimately, there is no object. According to Advaita Vedanta, the subject, the object, and the relationship between them collapses into this one reality called Brahman. So, but we can think of this as unmanifest, as a kind of the end point of our journey, as a kind of destination. So chapters number 7 to 12 give us a picture of both these aspects of the divine, and what does Bhagwan tell Arjuna about the divine in this chapter, and also in the previous 5 chapters which Bhagwan has been talking about both this aspect of the Saguna and Nirguna. And how does this then fit into the overall guidance of the Bhagavad Gita? So let's have a look at these questions. So as we know, absolute Brahman from the Advaita Vedanta point of view is Nirguna Brahman, which does not have any qualities. Nirguna means without any attributes. Absolute Brahman, which is pure consciousness, pure existence, pure bliss. And then this is the unmanifest Purusha. And here we will see many kind of descriptors or pointers, what Gurudev calls as pointers towards the unmanifest. Because how can you describe the unmanifest in the first place? Because we don't know what it is. Secondly, how can you describe something which is indescribable, unthinkable, unchangeable, eternal, imperishable? So we have to have certain pointers which point us in the right direction and takes the mind in that direction, ultimately absorbing it in the pure consciousness. So this is the highest level at which we can think about the divinity, which is the one of the unmanifest absolute Brahman, Nirguna Purusha. And at this level, Maya in conjunction with absolute Brahman has this effect of projecting the whole created universe for us. So Maya has got two powers, as you will remember. One is the projecting power, and the other one is the veiling power. So it veils the truth. That's why you see that line. It veils the truth, and then it projects the totality of the cosmic world, which is the totality of creation. So this is the cosmic Ishvara, the God principle, or principle of Ishvara, which is Saguna. Saguna, why? Because it has got these attributes. The gunas, as we know, are the attributes of nature. And the 3 gunas are the ones which are inherent in the way in which this cosmic creation functions and manifest in the sense of Prakriti. So here you got the Purusha, unmanifest, Brahman, and then you got Prakriti, which is now the consequence of Maya and Brahman. So as I'll explain to you that this is the Advaita way of thinking about it. So then we got the cosmic creation. And at the individual level, it becomes avatar. Still Saguna, still with attributes, manifest as Bhagwan. This is now the 3rd level, which we are coming down to. Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, and these have got various incarnations. So Vishnu has got the Dasavatar, Shiva has got, of course, his own self, and Brahmaji, who is the creator of this total universe, through this God principle, that becomes then another level of expression of the divine. And remember, there is still one more level, and sometimes we forget that. And this level is you and me, the personal jiva, who is this adhyatmic individual in life. This is the manifest jiva. And in the jiva, this highest absolute Brahman is expressing itself through our body, mind, intellect, as the doer, as the enjoyer, as the supporter, as the permitter, as the witness. So when we talk about sentiency, as we'll see, sentiency is nothing but the inert Prakriti in conjunction with the pure consciousness, pure existence bliss, which then vitalizes this body, mind, intellect, gives it awareness and sentiency, and gives it a sense of identity, and there we are. You and me. The only problem is that we are divine, but we have forgotten. We don't know because of the effect of Maya, which at the individual level becomes avidya. So all these are to be seen as levels of expression of divinity. Okay? So within this context, we can see that the absolute Brahman, Nirguna Brahman, comes into existence as individual avatar, descent into Prakriti, into humanity. And Bhagwan is so kind and compassionate that he comes and he declares his own intention in chapter number 4. He says, I come to restore Dharma. I have come to protect the good. And I have come to deal with those who are evil. So Bhagwan descends into humanity as this avatar, taking a name, taking a form. For what? For the good of humanity. And what are we supposed to do in return? We as individual jivas have to ascend into Godhood, into the real self. So this is divinity. This is about Bhagwan coming into humanity. And this is also about our own journey back to Godhood, back to the self. And this picture, if you remember, whilst you're reading the individual verses of the Bhagavad Gita, it then begins to make so much sense. Okay? So in a sense, this is summarizing those chapters. And if we then look at how, from the Advaita Vedanta perspective, Brahman, Paraprakriti plus Maya is equal to Ishvara. This is the God principle. This is now the totality of creation. And just like as the snake comes into existence because of the rope, if the rope does not exist, the mistaken snake would not exist. So the snake is sustained by the rope, and so also creation through Brahman. The illusion of duality and diversity comes to an end when we have both the Jnana and the Vijnana of the divine. So this is our project. Our project is to ascend into Godhood, ascend into our true self, and discover who we truly are, and establish ourselves in this greatest reality. So nothing is higher than Brahman. That is the ultimate reality. That is the ultimate cause of all the causes. There is nothing which is causing Brahman. It has ever been, it is imperishable, it is without beginning, without end. And if Bhagwan is the highest reality and he pervades everything, then how can he be recognized in the perceptible universe? This is one question, is that how do we recognize the divine right in front of us, here and now, so that I can begin to connect with the divine through the method of bhakti? And this is what this chapter is all about, telling us how to connect with the divine in the perceptible universe itself. And as Bhagwan will show us, that at each level you can connect with the divine. There is no absence of the divine. It's only that we are wearing this, glasses which don't allow us to see anything of the divine. We need to polish those glasses and take them off and see the divine in its true form right in front of us. So here is how we can describe another way of describing Ishwar Swarupam, which Bhagwan talks about in chapter number 7. Apara Prakriti, lower nature, 5 elements, mind, intellect, egoity, which is inert, without consciousness, and with attributes, Saguna Tattvam, continuous modification taking place in this lower nature, and it has got a dependent existence. It is dependent, it is the manifest, it is the immanent divine. Okay, so at the individual level, we can say we are located in this lower nature. In itself, it is without consciousness, but when it comes into contact with the pure consciousness, then this sentiency is available to us in the body, mind, intellect. This is the lower nature. And then Paraprakriti, which is higher nature, pure consciousness, existence principle, without any attributes. That's why it's called Nirguna, whereas the other one is called Saguna. So Nirguna Tattvam, without modification, there is no modification taking place in the pure consciousness, in Brahman. It has got independent existence. It does not depend on anything for its existence. It is unmanifest, it is transcendental, it is divine. So one way of thinking about divinity is lower nature, higher nature. Okay? And this is called Apara Prakriti, Paraprakriti, lower nature, higher nature. Then Bhagwan gives us ways of recognizing in the same chapter of the created objective world. Jnanam is Vibhuti. This is the Vishvarupa. And if we look at the cosmic divine manifestation, then what Bhagwan is telling us, that look at the sapidity of the water. Look at the moon. Look at the light of the moon, light of the sun. Look at all these things which are right in front of you. Hear the word Om. That Om is nothing but divinity expresses itself through sound. Fragrance of the earth, brilliance of the fire. So many things Bhagwan talks about. Strength of the strong without desire, attachment. Life in all beings, austerity in the austere, eternal seed of all beings. If you go back to chapter number 7, you'll see all these vibhutis which Bhagwan describes in this chapter. And if he talks about vibhuti, then vibhutis are how to know the divine in the phenomenal world. And even in chapter number 10, he takes us through understanding these vibhutis by saying that there is the Saguna Upasana and there is a Nirguna Dhyana. For the Manda Adhikari, for a person who has just stepped onto the spiritual path, he needs to kind of focus his mind because his mind is not yet ready for the Nirguna Dhyanam. So he has to look at specific names and forms and begin to identify divinity in each one. Then these are the kind of examples he gives. Bhagwan gives us 72 vibhutis through which we can recognize the divine in a name and a form. And although some of these may not be kind of known to us, unless we are familiar with the Vedas and the Puranas, etc., we can kind of convert this into a contemporary life. So, for example, if we say mountains, we may not know where Meru Mountain is. Not the Meru Mountain in Kenya, but Meru Mountain, which is the center of the whole universe. In that sense, we can think of mountains as this wonderful visions which we have of this Mount Everest, for example, Kailash Parvat. And we look at these wonderful things in nature, which then take us into this silent meditation. Here is God right in front of me. And to again and again go through this kind of connection with the divine is really what we need to do through associating, connecting with the things around us which remind us of the divine, and we recognize them as divine because Bhagwan himself has told us that he is there. He is to be recognized in these vibhutis. So progression of knowing the divine, and this we have talked about before, is first of all one in all, chapter number 10. What does it mean? Having the vision of seeing this oneness in everything. I see you as an expression of that Atma. I see the creatures in front of me, and I say the Atma or the reality, which is pure consciousness, is expressing through them as well, is expressing through each and every name and form. Whether it is consciousness, whether it is existence, whether it is bliss. Each one of these becomes an expression in each one of these entities which I see in front of me, and I begin to recognize the divine, the one in all. This is the first stage. Then, with a greater purification of the mind, I begin to develop this vision of diverse objects held in this one reality. Like Bhagwan says, everything is in me. At that level of cosmic creation, this cosmic form of Bhagwan, everything is contained in this one reality. So we have moved from the avatar, we are now moving on to the God principle, Ishvara, and this kind of switching over or a gradual progression towards all-in-one takes a bit of time, but then we begin to see this as this one reality in which all these objects are contained. And then the third stage of our spiritual development, really becoming one with that eternal reality. So it is not me and divine, but I am Brahman. I am divinity myself. This is what takes us to the highest level of realization of the self. So this is a progression. Earlier chapters kind of giving us ways in which we can perceive the divine in our phenomenal world, then the description of the vision in terms of seeing the one in all, then the all in one, and then the only one reality, which includes everything, manifest, unmanifest, but knowing that I myself am Brahman. This is the important thing. So Brahman then, another way of looking at how this divinity expresses itself, again, Arjuna asked this question to Bhagwan, because Bhagwan mentions this right at the end of chapter number 7. He mentioned some words which Arjuna has not heard before. So he asked him about Adhyatma, Adideva, Adhyajna, Karma, and Adibhuta. And all these are kind of expressions of Brahman in the phenomenal world, in you and me. So Brahman is expressing itself right here, right now, because there is control, there is functioning, there is movement going on, there is matter in this body, gross body, there is sentiency, awareness, understanding, knowledge. All this is there. And what is that? How do we begin to recognize that, this control which I have over the body is nothing but an expression of Brahman? This is how we have to change our mindset, change our lens of thinking and seeing things, so that we begin to see this divinity everywhere and anywhere. So this is another way in which we can begin to recognize divinity through this kind of expression, Adhyatma, Adideva, Adhyajna, Karma, Adibhuta. And all these are ways in which we can ourselves begin to understand that Brahman is expressing itself through me. So this is the imperishable Nirguna, perishable Saguna, expressing itself through the created universe, and then expressing itself in creation as well as the Jiva itself. So another picture of the divine, understanding the divine before we understand devotion. So this is the relationship between divine self and Prakriti. And Bhagwan says, sitting like one indifferent, unattached to these acts, Dhananjaya, these acts do not bind me. So although Bhagwan is saying these are things which are created through the God principle as this Prakriti, that self, the divine self, the true self, is not attached to any of these things, indifferent to everything which is going on. Under me as a supervisor, this is another way of conceptualizing God. I am the supervisor, and under me as her supervisor, Prakriti produces the moving and the unmoving. Because of this, the world revolves, the cosmic functions are taking place, the movement in the whole cosmos, galaxies moving. Within the galaxies, the systems are moving, the solar systems, the planets, everything is moving. And there are things which are unmoving. All this is because Bhagwan is the supervisor of Prakriti and produces all these things. So in chapter number 9, then Bhagwan gives how we can begin to connect with the divine. Fix your mind on me, be devoted to me, sacrifice to me, bow down to me, having thus united your whole self with me, taking me as the supreme goal, you shall come to me. So Bhagwan is also now right in chapter number 9, beginning to take us into the method of devotion, the yoga of devotion, which he then crystallizes in this chapter number 12. So we have seen this picture before, and these are the various different pathways which Bhagwan is explaining in the Bhagavad Gita. May not be apparent as we read verse by verse, but when you look at the whole picture, then these pathways to perfection are available, which Bhagwan guides us through in the Bhagavad Gita step by step. So Jnana Nishtha, becoming established in that knowledge, leads to liberation, and how we can make that journey through the unmanifest Brahman, Dhyana as a Jnani, or manifest Brahman through Upasana as a Bhakta, as a Karma Yogi, eventually all of this taking us to the path of liberation, which I've explained in quite a bit of detail in the earlier talks. And Bhagwan does not rule out even the Ajnani. He says even the lowest of the low, who are completely in a state of ignorance, can still come on the pathway. Nobody is ruled out. So these are the pathways. Then how do they relate to Bhakti Yoga? So here we can see that it is mainly, we are talking about Saguna Upasana, and Saguna Upasana is the manifest Brahman, which is the totality of creation, like I explained before, that all these 4 different levels of understanding the divine. This then comes into our understanding of the divine and the method by which we are going to reach that divine. So Vishvarupa Upasana. This was one of our questions earlier on, is that how do we then connect the idea of divine with the guidance Bhagwan gives in terms of the practice. So here's the practice. Vishvarupa Upasana, all in one. And then at the lower level is Ekarupa Upasana. So you take one name and form, whether it is of Bhagwan, whether it is of anything else, this seeing that oneness in each and every form, each and every name, and then we come to one in all as an experience, moment to moment, day to day, which then flowers into all in one as our mind gets more and more available for this divine contemplation of all in one. So also we have to remember Karma Yoga, because Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga go hand in hand. Karma Yoga, remember, is about renunciation, fruit of the action, as well as the action itself. And how are we going to do that? Dedicate all actions to me and then function in the world, giving up the fruit of the action in the first place, and then renouncing action. Kishore bhai. So renunciation, fruit of the action, as well as the action itself. So we can see Bhakti Yoga is now at this particular, which Bhagwan himself is going to tell us that if you can't do Vishvarupa, go to Ekarupa. If you can't do Ekarupa, go to renunciation of the fruit of the action. This will come to see later. But you can see how this total concept of the divine is related to Bhakti Yoga, and how that Bhakti Yoga is related to various different ways of practicing the Karma Yoga. Vimaji, can you switch off your... Okay, so very important to understand the Vibhutis, because this is our immediate project, is to understand the principle, the purpose and the process of the divine glories. Knowing the divine in the phenomenal world, chapter number 10. So Uttam Adhikari is the highest Adhikari who is able to then go beyond the phenomena of creation and is able to experience seeing himself or herself in everything, Brahman. This is level 1, transcendental Nirguna Dhyanam. So if the mind is very much purified, then you go to this stage of Nirguna Dhyana. Then Madhyamadikari, I am the beginning, the middle, and also the end of all beings. This is at the level of cosmic creation. Beyond the names and the forms, I see Ishvara containing all. And then level 2, this is immanent Saguna Upasana, all in one. This is for the Madhyamadikari. And then for the Manda Adhikari, level number 3, seeing the one in all with name and form. So all these different levels of our attainment, as we go along the spiritual journey, we can begin to take up certain practices which then become available to us. And if we want to do Nirguna Dhyanam when we are starting on the pathway, it's going to be very difficult. So Bhagwan has shown us the way in which we can develop ourselves to be able to do that. So Bhagwan says, I am the self, O Gurakesh, seated in the heart of all beings. I am the beginning, the middle, and also the end of all beings. So seeing the divine in all these vibhutis on a day-to-day basis, moment to moment, our experience of the divine is possible through the vibhutis. And then in chapter number 11, you remember that Arjuna has the experience of the cosmic form, the vision of the cosmic form, and he says, I see Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh as all in one. In other words, he's be able to see at the highest level of creation. And he sees the boundless form on every side, manifold forms, etc. And he says, this, O Lord of the universe, this I see your cosmic form. I see the crown and the club and the discus. This is the kind of way in which Vishnu, we see a portrayal of Vishnu blazing like burning fire and sun, incomprehensible. So Arjuna is able to tell us and give us the description of what that cosmic form might be experienced as. And Bhagwan gives us the instruction how to have darshan of the Vishwarup. By single-minded devotion, can I of this form be known and seen in this reality? And how are we going to see that? How to see and know God in the world? He gives us the 5-point plan. This is another 5-point plan. Chapter number 3 has also got a 5-point plan of Karma Yoga. This is the 5-point plan of Bhakti Yoga. He who does actions for me, he who looks me as the supreme, he who is devoted to me, free from attachment, bears no enmity towards none. Here, 5 different things. He comes to me, O Pandava. So we can see how the first 3 are about turning towards God and making that intense connection with God. And then, as far as the outer world is concerned, towards the world free from attachment and no enmity to anybody. And this constitutes as Bhakti Yoga. So here's one way of thinking about Bhakti Yoga. At the end of chapter number 11, this is what Bhagwan gives the guidance to Arjuna as, and this becomes now the theme of chapter number 12. So this is where Bhagwan begins to say, those who, fixing their mind on me, worship me, ever steadfast and endowed with supreme faith, these, in my opinion, are the best in yoga. Remember the question Arjuna asked? This is in answer to that. Now here we can see he is moving towards worship and supreme faith. Supreme faith, remember, is what he's saying. And he also says those who worship the imperishable. Now that one, the first one is about the manifest one. This is now about the unmanifest, imperishable, indefinable, unmanifest, omnipresent, unthinkable, etc. He says that having restrained all the senses, taking these as the pointers, even-minded everywhere, rejoicing in the welfare of all being, they also come to me. In other words, whoever is doing whatever sadhana they're doing according to the level of the spiritual development, eventually everybody comes to the highest level of realization. So Saguna Bhakti, Nirguna Dhyanam. He is mentioning both of these here. Okay? So then Bhagwan says, greater is the trouble for those whose minds are set on the unmanifest. Because it's very hard for the embodied to reach. Very hard to reach. Why? Because we are so identified with the body, mind, intellect that it's very hard for us to imagine anything unmanifest. Something which is beyond creation, something which is beyond any kind of perceptible prakriti. very hard for us to get into that deep absorption of the unmanifest. He says it's very hard for the embodied. Why? Because we are identified. But he says, those who worship me, manifest form, renouncing all actions in me, regarding me as the supreme goal, meditating on me with a single-minded devotion, yoga, for them whose minds are set on me, verily I become ere long the Savior, to save them, to lift them. He's going to airlift us from the ocean of samsara. We are drowning in the ocean of samsara. Bhagwan is coming with his helicopter. He's going to lift us out because we have reached out. And we say, I am worshipping you. I'm renouncing all my actions. I'm doing this, that, and the other. I'm practicing this single-minded devotion, bhakti. And Bhagwan says, I'm going to lift you out of there and take you right up to the highest state of realization. So this is in contrast to the earlier chapter where Bhagwan says, lift yourself by yourself. Here Bhagwan, through his compassion, is saying, I'm going to lift you. So wonderful. This chapter is very wonderful in terms of what Bhagwan is telling us. So, okay, going on to the ladder of practices and the best practice. So Bhagwan has already given his response in terms of saguna, upasana, nirguna dhyanam. Nirguna dhyanam is saying it's very difficult for the embodied, but taking up the pathway of saguna bhakti, you will be able to reach me. Why? Because I myself will become your savior. I lift you out of this ocean of samsara. Wonderful way in which Bhagwan tells us that he is there waiting for us to do these practices and then to reach out to him. And Bhagwan is going to hold us and take us to the highest realization. So what are these practices then? So Bhagwan says, fix your mind on me only, place your intellect in me only, then thereafter you shall no doubt live in me alone. Now, fix your mind only in me, intellect only in me. In other words, feelings of devotion, only feelings of devotion in the heart, mind. Only thoughts of God in the intellect. Not an easy thing to do, but certainly this is what we can begin to think about when we talk about the highest level of this way of living in God alone. He says, okay, now if you're unable to practice that, see, compassion of Bhagwan, he says, okay, I know that's very hard, maybe it's not possible, but if you're not able to do that, then if you're unable to fix your mind steadily upon me, then the yoga of constant practice. Why practice is required? Because my mind goes here, my mind goes there, I have to bring it back again and again and again. This is called abhyas. Bina, your phone, can everybody keep their phone on mute, please? So if you are unable to fix your mind steadily, then your mind is getting distracted. But you, through abhyas, bring it back again and again, seek to reach me. Yeah, well, that might be difficult as well. So what are we going to do? If you are unable to practice abhyas yoga, because, that concentration may be difficult, then perform actions, because you're performing actions, but perform those actions for my sake. So that even by doing actions for my sake, you shall attain perfection. So coming back to even, the transactional world where we are performing actions all the time, he says, take me into that action. Perform all those actions for my sake. Dedicate all your actions to me. Then you shall also attain perfection. And he says, if you're not able to do even this, performing action for my sake, then renounce all fruits of all actions. Because that is the thing which we are interested in. I want to get this, I want to get that, I want to attain this through my actions. And if we give up the fruit of the action, we detach ourselves from the result of our action, renounce it. If we are able to do that, taking refuge in the Lord, self-control, even then we are going to reach Bhagwan. So he has not left any stone unturned, as it were. If not at the highest level, abhyas. If not abhyas, action. If not action, fruit of the action. So this is how Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga are related together. So one is the pathway to the other, but Karma Yoga requires for us to have this devotion towards the Lord. So what Bhagwan then goes on to say, knowledge is indeed better than practice, meditation is better than knowledge, renunciation of fruit of action is better than meditation. Peace immediately follows renunciation. So we may think meditation is the highest, but Bhagwan is saying, actually, the easiest thing to do, and therefore maybe the best thing to do, is to renounce the fruit of the action, renounce action itself. That may be even better, because it's easier to do than to get into deep state of absorption. So Bhagwan says, this is now the kind of ladder of practices which I've already talked about. If we can't fix our mind completely and our heart completely on the Lord, we need to do constant practice. If not, then we perform actions for the Lord. If not, then we renounce the fruit of action, still controlling the mind and taking refuge in the Lord, surrendering to the Lord and saying, I'm giving up my fruit of the action because I know that you are the giver of the fruit of the action. Karma phaladata. This, if our understanding comes, then it is easier to give up the fruit of the action as well. So this is the ladder of practices. And then, of course, in verse number 12, Bhagwan also says, abhyas practice is good. But if you can, then knowledge, jnanam, is better than abhyas. And then karma phala tyaga, which we already talked about, renunciation of the fruit of action is better than jnanam. And then he says, shanti immediately follows karma phala tyaga. So we can kind of look at this karma phala tyaga as really the starting point of our sadhana, the easiest to do on a day-to-day basis, that we are constantly thinking about giving up the fruit of the action and then constantly thinking of the divine while we are doing that. So that's why Bhagwan has elevated to saying, okay, this is perhaps the best way of doing it, because peace immediately follows. And remember in chapter number 2 what it was saying, without peace, how can there be happiness? So if we are going to have peace by just giving up the fruit of the action, we can experience joy in our life immediately. Okay? So that's why Bhagwan is saying, karma phala tyaga is, in a sense, better for jnana, better than jnana. Okay, so the most interesting part of this chapter, of course, is the 36 qualities of a perfect bhakta. So who is this bhakta who is dear to the Lord? And he says, my bhakta who is dear to me, he is the one who hates no creature. He's got no hatred for anybody. And why do you think that is? Because if he is the devotee of the Lord, and if he sees the divine in everyone, how can he have hate for any creature? Because he's seeing the divine in everybody. The one in all, remember, the one in all is what he's seeing, and therefore how can there be any hatred? Hatred only comes if we see something different from ourselves, or if we see something different from the divine. Then hatred begins to develop. But here there is no hatred. Friendly and compassionate to all. Why? Again, because seeing the divinity everywhere, this is my friend. Why? Because divinity is there. Compassion is there as well. Somebody who is in need of compassion, very easily available for the bhakta to give out. Free from attachment. Bhagwan himself says, free yourself of this fruit of the action, attachment to the fruit of the action, attachment to the things and beings and situations of the world as well. Free from attachment, free from egoism, that I am this person. This mamakara, ahankara, these are the two great obstacles in our spiritual path. Me and mine. And Bhagwan says, the one who does not have any kind of egoism, he is very dear to me. Balanced in pleasure and pain. Balanced, which means pleasure is neutralized, pain has been neutralized. Evenness of the mind. Samadarshanam. This is the secret of bhakti, is that it gives us this evenness of the mind, that equal vision. Why? Because we see God everywhere. It gives us this equal vision. Begin to see this in your own life. Begin to see divinity everywhere and see what difference it makes to you. Balanced in pleasure and pain. And forgiving. Forgiveness comes easily. Why? Because this is the Lord's play. This is the Lord's Leela, as it were. And therefore forgiving becomes part and parcel of being a bhakta. Ever content. This contentment is not because I've got this and I've got that in my life, but contentment because it is a natural consequence of recognizing divinity in myself and recognizing divinity everywhere around me. Ever content. What is the opposite of content? Discontent. Where does discontent leave us? With an agitated mind. Mind is always agitated. I want this, I can't get this, I can't get. Stress. But when we are in constant touch with the divine through our bhakti, there is contentment. And with contentment comes peace. With the peace comes joy. This is the beauty of Bhakti Yoga. Steady in meditation. Constantly being able to be in a meditative, mindful state of divinity everywhere. Self-control, discipline is there. Controlling the mind, controlling the intellect, controlling the senses, self-control at all levels of being. Why? For the sake of Bhagwan, for the sake of my devotion to the Lord, my love for the Lord. I'm controlling all this so that I can be more and more and more in touch with the Lord. And possessed of firm conviction. Conviction is very strong. And why do you think that firm conviction is very strong? Is because the faith is intense. Remember, supreme faith. This is what Bhagwan is asking. Supreme faith means that faith is unshaken. Like it says in one of the bhajans, even if the center of the universe is collapsing, this person of firm faith is not bothered. Person of firm conviction, because supreme faith is there. With mind and intellect dedicated to me. Both the mind, heart, feelings, intellect, thoughts, everything is dedicated to me. And then Bhagwan goes on to say, he by whom the world is not agitated, not affected. We go around in the world agitating everybody, especially in this lockdown. You know, the agitation level intensity has really been turned on. We agitated each other, we agitated everybody else. And in turn, we are agitated by the world. Here, Bhakta, nothing to him. He is saying, by whom the world is not agitated, not affected, and who cannot be agitated by the world. Again, samatvam bhava, samdarshanam, divinity everywhere. Therefore, the mind becomes totally unagitated. Why? Because it is at peace with itself. It is at peace with the world. Why? Because this is the divine expressing itself in so many ways. Who is freed from joy, envy, fear, anxiety. All those hallmarks of the ego. Ego is always up and down, joy one moment, suffering the next moment, envy, fear, anxiety, all these are kind of expressions of the ego. And why the ego has gone? Because I'm nothing. Lord is everything. Divinity is all around me. And if divine is this cosmic form, this ego is nothing. And therefore, freedom from joy, envy, fear, anxiety, indeed, freedom from the ego itself. He who is free from wants, desires, I want this, I want that, everything I want in my life, I'm going to run after it, run after this, that, and the other, free from wants. Why? Because I'm just doing what the Lord wants me to do. This is my dharma. Remember the theme of dharma right throughout the Bhagavad Gita, do your duty. And Arjuna's question is about what should I do? Do your dharma. He is telling us the same thing, do your dharma, forget about desires, everything else will follow from me. I will take care of you. This is what Bhagwan is saying. Yoga Kshema, I will take care of those things which you don't have, and I will protect those things which you have. Pure, alert, unconcerned, untroubled, renouncing all undertakings. These are again more pointers of what we should be cultivating in our own life, becoming really perfect bhaktas in our endeavor. So Bhagwan further goes on to say, he who neither rejoices, nor hates, nor grieves, nor desires, renouncing good, renouncing evil, same to foe and friend, same in honor and dishonor, same in cold and heat, same in pleasure and pain, and who is free from attachment. So Bhagwan is giving us things which need to happen at each level of our being as this bhakta. At the level of the intellect, at the level of the mind, at the level of the senses, actions, fruit of the actions, and if we take all that into account, we have to understand that there are things to be done in order to cultivate these qualities for ourselves, so that we can begin to move towards perfection in our bhakti. To whom censure and praise are equal. Imagine what happens if somebody praises us. We blow up like a balloon. What happens if somebody punctures our ego? Next moment we are completely collapsed. But for a bhakta, censure, praise doesn't mean anything. Those are equal things which are there to be experienced, but not to disturb the mind. And who is silent? Not that he's going to kind of stop talking, but there is silence in the mind. There is silence around him, as it were. And he is in that true silence, which comes as a result of this intense bhakti. Who is content with anything. Contentment. Again, he is mentioning this, content with anything. And homeless. Homeless may bring a certain picture into our mind, but this is not what he's talking about. He is talking about homeless in relationship to this home which we call the body, mind, intellect. This is no longer my home. I'm homeless. Why? Because I am that divinity. I am that which is beyond any kind of home. So he becomes homeless. Why? Because this body in which I'm inhabiting, which I've occupied, I no longer identify with it, and therefore I become homeless. Steady-minded. Mind is ever steady, not disturbed by anything. And if you see all those qualities which we have spoken about before, you will see each one of them contributes to this sense of silence, sense of even-mindedness, and a mind which becomes quiet, still, silent. And remember, I said that the hallmarks of a very sattvic, pure mind through this kind of Bhakti Yoga, Shanti, Santosh, Samadhan. These are the things which begin to be experienced moment to moment by the one who gets purified. So it's no wonder Bhagwan is saying silence, contentment. and this constant sense of connection with the divine on the one hand, and the relinquishing of the ego on the other. So that when we give up the ego, all these things which Bhagwan has been mentioning, they kind of fall by the wayside. And we begin to experience life in a very, very different way. So, how to live through the Gita? And this is one thing which all of you can try and do. Memorize all the qualities, 7 verses in this chapter. Keep a list with you always. Remind yourself of these qualities. See how they compare with what is going on in your life and what you are kind of expressing at this moment. Fine, everything is going to be there. Doesn't mean that it can't be changed. Our sadhana is for inner transformation. Remember, inner transformation cannot take place without any purusharth, without any kind of self-effort. So this is where self-effort is required. Just take 1 or 2 qualities a week, focus on them, bringing them into your awareness through the 4 A's method. Become alert when the quality is being contradicted in your experience. For example, if you experience dislike or hatred towards anything, become alert. Become alert. And remember, one of the qualities which you have to cultivate: no hatred towards anything or anyone. And then remind yourself of this divine aspect, Saguna, Nirguna, Ishvara, Atara, whatever way you can connect with the divine. Remind yourself and then consciously change any kind of negative feeling into a neutral one, or even more important, a positive one towards the object, person or situation. This is your day-to-day connection with the divine. Of course, the Navvida Bhakti, the 9 modes of devotion mentioned in our scriptures, are also ways in which we can practice our bhakti. This is the way in Bhagavad Gita talks about bhakti. So this is again to remind ourselves the journey, the spiritual journey, Saguna Bhakti to start with, Nirguna Dhyanam to follow up, and then what we are looking at in this chapter is all about Saguna Bhakti, how to steadily renounce the fruit of the action and the action itself, disidentify with enjoyership, doership, through this dedication of all our actions to the Lord, giving up the fruit of the action, karma phala tyaga, which we talked about, and then steadily increasing this devotion towards the Lord, seeing the one in all, and then attempting to have this cosmic vision. And when the mind becomes purified and ripe and ready, then Nirguna Dhyanam comes automatically. It becomes like a natural consequence of that purification, so that the mind doesn't have to be prompted into going. You don't have to struggle. Easily you can attain Nirguna Dhyanam. So let's establish ourselves in this bhakti, and then Nirguna Dhyanam has to follow. No choice. Bhagwan says there's no choice, it's going to follow. So they indeed who follow this immortal dharma, law of life as described above. So this is his calling immortal dharma, the law of life. And we can also take this as a translation of living a dharmic life. And sometimes people can ask this question: how do I live a dharmic life? 36 qualities to cultivate in your life. And if you can do that and do your duty, you will become the perfect dharmi, living a dharmic life in the most spiritual way. Those who follow this immortal dharma described above, which is what we've been talking about, endowed with faith. Again, faith is very much a part of the equation, that we have to have that faith. And then regarding me as their supreme goal. So having supreme faith, having the supreme goal, and having all the means which are turned towards the Lord. So not only the goal, but also the means by which we live our life, endowed and infused with the divine. And if we live like that, live this immortal dharma, then Bhagwan says, such devotees are exceedingly dear to me. So all that has been described, which I talked about, endowed with faith, and saying, there is nothing for me to achieve in this life except the supreme goal. Supreme goal is the Lord. I only want Lord in my life, nothing else. Cultivating those qualities. Unconditional devotion and flow of love towards the Lord. This is what makes devotees to be exceedingly dear to the Lord. So this is the final verse in the Bhagavad Gita, and therefore, what will we do now? So again, just to remind that this is really the keystone to our spiritual journey, is to live a conscious spiritual life. And Bhagwan has given us so much wealth and so much jnanam in terms of how we can do that. Giving us specific instruction, giving us vibhutis, giving us everything which we need for our spiritual journey. And if we take all that into a conscious way of living, then this 4 A's of conscious living will become the basis of our very quick spiritual unfoldment. So 4 A's, 4 B's, 4 C's, 4 D's. By now you should become very familiar, and you should be able to tell me now what these 4 A, B, C, D's are. And as much as you practice and bring them into your own life, they become a natural way of being in the world. They become so natural that you can't even think of how can I live without this kind of conscious way of living according to the Bhagavad Gita. So listen, read, reflect on the content of chapter number 12, the Yoga of Devotion. Ensure that you understand the meaning of the divine and its many manifest and unmanifest forms, how the relationship between the unmanifest, as I described right at the very beginning, and the manifest, which is Prakriti, and how we can begin to think about what these connections are, and how the manifest appears to us right in front of us as the divine. Read the chapter commentary as well from Gurudev's Holy Gita. If you don't have it, it's available free of charge. You can go to the bookshop and get one. How the principles and practice apply in your life. Because it's not studying the Bhagavad Gita. It is about how does this apply to my life and how can I transform my life. This is what it is all about. Prepare a plan to practice at least one aspect of Bhakti Yoga, immersing yourself completely in it for a complete week or more. And then remember the 36 qualities of the perfect Bhakta. Cultivate each one in yourself over time. As I said, take up one quality if you want to for 1 week and completely immerse yourself in it. And then see what difference it makes in terms of your experience of not only of yourself, but the world around you. And then continue to practice all the other techniques which you have seen in the previous chapters. I know there's a lot which is there, but according to your ability, according to where you are, just keep on practicing and prepare and execute a daily intensified plan of meditation. If you don't already have one, just prepare a plan and sit for meditation, even if it's for 5-10 minutes, extremely useful. Okay? So there we are. Enjoy the sadhana, stay safe, stay well, and then we'll catch up next month. Thank you very much, and Hari Om.